If I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
It was the cold morning of July 3, 1976, when officers responded to a disturbance at the apartment of one Joachim Kroll, only to find a 4-year-old girl's corpse in his apartment, with parts of her flesh and organs being cooked in a boiling pot. Kroll was arrested, tried, and given a sentence worthy of his crime. On several occasions, judges have had to convict criminals like these who not only murdered their victims, but also ate them afterwards. These cannibalistic killers include deranged psychopaths who would eat their victims raw, and stone-cold serial killers who loved cooked human flesh. From men who would rape dead bodies of women and girls to women who murdered people and make cakes out of them, here are 20 killers who ate their victims. The last story will give you chills, as the victim's corpse was brutally raped and eaten raw. 20. Jeffrey Dahmer. In Wisconsin, USA, one of the most twisted and blood-curdling cases of cannibalistic murder was uncovered. Jeffrey Dahmer, a seemingly upright citizen, ended up committing some of the most gruesome crimes ever recorded in history. Growing up, Dahmer had a normal childhood and what some would call a pretty face. However, by the time he was caught, this individual had committed over 17 murders and had a fridge full of human body parts, which he consumed whenever he felt like it. Authorities were shocked to find out that Jeffrey didn't just kill people at random, but also dismembered them and stored up their body parts in a refrigerator. Jeffrey had committed his first murder in 1978 when he was just 18 years old. His parents had just divorced, and he was left in the family home alone. As an avid drinker at the time, Jeffrey invited a guy named Stephen Hicks over to drink some beer with him. However, in his twisted mind, he never wanted the guest to leave. And so when Hicks stood up to leave, Jeffrey hit him in the back of the head with a dumbbell, knocking him out. Next, he dissected and pulverized the young man before scattering the remains throughout his backyard. What's even more disturbing is that Jeffrey admitted the only reason why he killed Stephen Hicks that day was because he wanted him to stay.
He had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them.
Right.
As the years passed, Jeffrey picked up another habit of drugging men unconscious and raping them in gay bathhouses. But it wasn't until 9 years after the first murder that he killed again, this time beating a man to death in a hotel room after inviting him over for a good time. Jeffrey claimed he committed the crime in a blacked-out state. But then the murders continued in the following years, from 1988 to 1990. Jeffrey would invite unsuspecting men or prostitutes over from bars and then rape them in his apartment before strangling them to death or killing them in some other weird fashion. Even worse, Jeffrey Dahmer would have sex with the corpses, dissect or dismember them, take horrific photographs of the decaying private parts, and even store some body parts in the fridge for later consumption. Neighbors soon began to complain about the disturbing smells coming from the young man's apartment, but it wasn't until July 22, 1991, when a man named Tracy Edwards escaped from Jeffrey's apartment to invite the police, that all his hideous acts were exposed. Dahmer was arrested and given 15 life sentences, which he served at the Columbia Correctional Institution. However, he was killed by an inmate in 1994. 19. Joachim Kroll. Another twisted cannibalistic murderer who left a wake of dead bodies in his path was Joachim Kroll. Born on April 17, 1933, in Zabrze, Poland, Kroll made his way to Germany after the war, where he began to kill people. Kroll's killings began in 1955, soon after the death of his mom. His first victim was a 19-year-old girl named Irmgard Strahl, who he raped and stabbed to death before removing her internal organs and thrashing her body in a barn. The following year, he raped and killed a 12-year-old girl. However, it wasn't until his next victims that he really began to show his cannibalistic tendencies. In 1959, Kroll raped and strangled a 16-year-old named Manuela Knott to death before going on to carve some pieces of flesh from her buttocks and thighs. He continued this practice of raping and strangling women to death and also chopping off pieces of their flesh for consumption for several years, up until July 3, 1976, when the police caught him. Kroll was busted right in the process of cooking his victim, a 4-year-old named Marion Ketter. Later investigations showed that he often had sex with the bodies of his victims after killing them. It was also discovered that a great number of innocent people, close friends and associates of his past victims, had been innocently accused and convicted for his crimes over the years. In the end, Kroll confessed to a total of 14 murders between the years 1955 and 1976. He was given 9 consecutive life sentences, though he died of a heart attack on July 1, 1991, at just 58 years of age. 18. Nikolai Zhumagaliev. Nikolai Zhumagaliev was a cannibalistic psychopath who earned the nickname Metal Fang after his 2 front teeth were replaced with metal ones, thanks to a childhood fight. However, what would really make this name and its bearer quite famous was the series of humans that got killed and eaten by the same set of teeth. Between the years 1979 and 1981, Zhumagaliev killed 9 people, eating their flesh afterwards. From 1989 to 1991, he went on a killing spree, murdering and cannibalizing women in the small villages surrounding Uzhhorod, Kazakhstan, and earning the nickname. But no one would have thought that Nikolai Zhumagaliev would turn into such a monster, as he had a decent childhood. Nikolai was the 3rd child and only son in a family of 4 children. After high school, he joined the Soviet Army, where he served in the Chemical Defense Unit. After his time in the Army was over, he began to travel around the world, doing odd jobs. However, when he returned home to his birthplace, Uzhhorod, he contracted syphilis and trichomoniasis. It was after suffering from these illnesses for 2 years that Nikolai Zhumagaliev carried out his first murder in January 1979. He stalked a peasant woman into the woods and slit her throat with a knife, drinking her blood. Afterwards, he stripped her naked, cut out her private parts and ovaries, and took the parts home, where he fried and ate them. After this event, Zhumagaliev developed a liking for human flesh, and so over the next couple of months, he killed 6 more women and stored their body parts in his fridge. His evil acts were revealed in 1981 during a dinner party he had hosted for friends. Zhumagaliev had lured away one of his guests and murdered him in a private room. However, rather than hide the corpse, Zhumagaliev proceeded to dismember the body right there. That's when he was caught and reported to the police. Although he was caught and arrested, Zhumagaliev wasn't convicted of his crimes because he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Rather, he was committed to a mental institution. He escaped in 1989 but was recaptured 2 years later and is still in captivity, though his whereabouts remain a mystery till today. 17. Leonardo Cianciulli. History has proven that men are usually the perpetrators of murder crimes. However, every once in a while, we get to see women commit some hideous crimes even worse than men. Leonardo Cianciulli was one such criminal. Having murdered 3 women between the years of 1939 and 1940, she went ahead to commit one of the most unusual cases of cannibalism, turning her victims' corpses into food for herself and her friends. Cianciulli was born in Italy in the year 1894. Her childhood was more or less insignificant, though a series of traumatic events would later lead her to become the cannibalistic murderer she became towards the end of her life. One significant thing about her life was her constant child loss. Cianciulli got pregnant 17 times and lost 13 of her kids, including 3 miscarriages. To add to the trauma, a fortune teller had told her all of her children would die, leading her to believe that she needed some kind of black magic soul exchange to preserve the lives of her remaining kids. And so, when World War II came and one of her favorite children was at the front lines, Cianciulli did the unexpected, killing 3 women between 1939 and 1940 as some sort of sacrifice to preserve the life of her kids. But she didn't stop there. Cianciulli was a shopkeeper back in the 90s, producing pastries, including cake and soap. In a harrowing testimony police investigators found in her memoir, she recounted how she dissected her victims before using their body parts to make soap and also using their coagulated blood to make crunchy cakes. She then gave out the soap and cake for free to customers who came to visit and also ate some herself. Cianciulli never showed remorse nor apologized for her actions after she was caught. In her own words, she described one of her victims, saying, "Her flesh was fat and white. That woman was really sweet." She was sentenced to 30 years in jail and 3 years in an asylum, but died in 1970 at the age of 76 in the asylum. 16. Albert Fish. Back in the early 1900s, one man, Albert Fish, managed to rape, murder, and cannibalize many children. The shocking story of Fish began in New York, though he was born in the beautiful city of Washington, D.C., USA. From childhood, Albert Fish lived a private life and also had a charming, unsuspecting look. However, he came from a family with a history of mental illness. His brother, for instance, had been admitted to an asylum right from his early days, while his mom complained of frequent hallucinations. After his dad died, Fish got admitted to an orphanage, and that was where he picked up an unnatural desire for pain. He loved being whipped or punished, and by the time he left the orphanage, he had a twisted love of pain for pleasure and would often beat himself. As the years went by, Fish graduated into sexual self-mutilation, embedding needles into his groin and flogging himself with a nail-studded paddle. In 1890, when Fish was 20 years old, he moved to New York. That's when his crimes against minors began. He would lure young boys to his home, where he'd rape and torture them. Even after his marriage in 1898, he continued his hideous practices, though he never mutilated his kids. Years passed, and Fish's insanity became more obvious, prompting him to do things like cutting off half a man's penis while he was alive. His wife became aware of his mental condition and left him for another man. This made Fish go deeper into self-mutilation. He also started eating raw meat. His murderous, cannibalistic tendencies caved in when he met a 10-year-old girl named Grace Budd. Somehow, Fish convinced the parents of the girl to let him take her to a birthday party he was having for his niece. Unbeknownst to them, he had prepared his mind all ready to kill and eat her. In a letter Fish wrote to Grace's mom 6 years later, he said, "Dear Mrs. Budd, on Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called you at 406 W15. Saint brought you pot cheese. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body." The harrowing letter was what led to the discovery and arrest of Albert Fish. However, during interrogation, he confessed to having raped at least 100 children and also cannibalized most of them. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by the electric chair. His sentence was carried out on January 16, 1936, at the Sing Sing prison in New York. 15. John Liver-Eating Johnson. The legend of the famed American mountain man, John Liver-Eating Johnson, is still told today. According to the story, the legendary cannibalistic monster was born John Jeremiah Garrison Johnston in New Jersey in 1824. After the Mexican-American War broke out, he enlisted in the Navy. But then he deserted the Army after an altercation with a senior officer and fled to the West. There he changed his name to John Johnson and began to serve as a woodhawk, supplying wood to shipbuilders. Johnson later married a young woman in the Alder Gulch territory of Montana, and also built a cabin in which they both lived. But in the year 1847, his wife was killed alongside her unborn baby by a group of Crow Indian men. His home was also burnt to the ground. This calamity sparked rage in the heart of Johnson, and he swore to track down and kill every single member of the Crow tribe. As a 6-foot-tall, 260-pound veteran soldier and hunter, it wasn't difficult for John Johnson to track down and kill every single member of the Crow. But he didn't stop there. He also cut out the liver of each of his victims and ate them. Johnson did this for 2 reasons. The first reason was to make a statement. The Crow people valued the human liver and considered it a necessity to enter the afterlife. By cutting it out, Johnson was denying them this chance. But also, on the other hand, Johnson was eating these livers as food to refuel his energy and continue the hunt through the wilderness. In the end, he killed and devoured about 300 Crow members, earning the nickname John Liver-Eating Johnson. He became feared amongst several other tribes in the West, and a mere mention of his name caused pandemonium. However, after 25 years, he made peace with the Crow and moved on to live a peaceful life up until his death in 1900. 14. Özgür Dengizover in Turkey, another mass murderer turned cannibalist, surfaced in the year 2007. Özgür Cengiz was born in 1980 to a war veteran and a seamstress. Cengiz was never an obedient child, often fighting with his parents or running away from home. Furthermore, he refused to complete his education after finishing middle school. In 1997, Cengiz committed his first murder, killing a close friend during a fight. The crime led him to prison, but he got released on parole after serving just 3 years of his 10-year sentence. Soon after his release, he joined the army, but soon got hospitalized due to psychological problems. After his time in the army was over, Dönges returned home to his hometown, Ankara. But in his usual stubborn nature, he refused to make a living in the tailoring shop his mom had opened for him. On the morning of June 5, 2007, Dönges killed Sedat Erzurumlu, a computer engineer who sold laptops. The engineer had told Dönges he won't be able to afford a particular laptop he had been looking at. This angered Dönges, prompting him to attack and kill Erzurumlu. Dönges also went ahead to steal 2 laptops from the shop and also took the victim's mobile phone. That same year in August, Dönges shot a man named Abbas Inan 8 times, intending to kill him. The victim, however, survived. But the following month, September, Dönges shot a garbage collector and also went ahead to kill a random worker named Kader by shooting him twice in the head. It was this last victim that Dönges cannibalized. Dönges skinned the corpse and ate some flesh raw, then went ahead to chop off most of the dead human flesh and take it home in a bag. At home, he gave some to his dogs, but stored the rest in his fridge. It took a while before the police found the mutilated corpse of Sefer. An investigation soon pointed to Denise as the person who had last made contact with the deceased. After a quick search of the apartment, they found the fresh human meat stored in the fridge, including parts of the buttock and thigh. Dönges was arrested but never showed remorse for his actions. He mostly laughed intermittently during interrogation, telling the authorities that he had developed a liking for human flesh. He stated that he would have continued killing had he not been caught. He was never sentenced to jail due to his insanity. Rather, he was sent to a psychiatric 13. Peter Bryan. One of the most harrowing cases of cannibalism ever recorded in history was committed by this man, Peter Bryan. At first, Bryan started with murders, killing 3 people between 1993 and 2004. The murders earned him a sentence, though he was found to be schizophrenic and sent to a psychiatric home instead. In the years following the conviction, Bryan was given the liberty to live in a hostel in North London, England, under supervision. However, Bryan seized the opportunity to commit another murder, killing his friend, Brian Cherry, and cooking his brains for food. That fateful day, neighbors called the cops after hearing noises and sounds of someone screaming. Officers who had responded to the call were shocked when they caught Bryan right in the middle of cooking his friend's brain with a frying pan. It turned out that Bryan's condition hadn't improved as his psychiatrist had thought, so he never should have left the facility to begin with. After getting arrested, authorities sent Bryan to Broadmoor Secure Hospital. But he didn't spend up to 10 days in this new facility when he attacked and killed a fellow patient named Richard Loudwell. Expert psychiatrists deduced that Bryan's condition made him appear sane and normal, even while he was very much insane. Today, he's still at the hospital serving his sentence. 12. Zhang Yongming. Zhang Yongming is one of the few or only serial killers who ate his victims. Yongming didn't just eat human body parts, but also sold them at a local market. The 57-year-old murdered 11 boys and young men between the years 2008 and 2012, and as of when he was arrested, he was suspected to be the culprit behind 17 cases of missing persons. Zhang Yongming, prior to his arrest, had lived a quiet and private life. He never spoke to anyone, not even his neighbors. However, suspicions arose when several young boys began to go missing. Some parents believed their kids had been abducted for slave labor, but no one suspected Zhang Yongming for the crimes. It wasn't until the police launched a deep investigation that they found out that the majority of the boys who went missing did so near Yongming's home. This discovery prompted officers to conduct a search in Zhang's home, where they found disturbing evidence like human remains that were hung to dry in the open and eyeballs stored in alcohol-filled bottles. After his arrest and confession, it was revealed that Zhang sold human meat at the local market, calling it ostrich meat. In the end, Zhang showed no remorse nor apologized for his crimes. He was found guilty of homicide and cannibalism and was executed in January 2013. 11. Surinder Kohli. Over in India, a local named Surinder Kohli raped, murdered, and cannibalized around 19 victims, a number of which were women and children. Kohli committed his hideous crimes under the instructions of a rich and powerful businessman named Moninder Singh Pandar. The evil acts of the duo were revealed in 2006 after the remains of two children who had gone missing 2 years prior were found near the residence of the two men. Coley had been serving as a servant or house help for Ponder at his home, House D5. When residents found skull remains in the tank drain, they quickly called the police, but they failed to respond. Taking laws into their own hands, an angry mob stormed the site, and a swift investigation was carried out. That's when Coley confessed to raping and killing about 6 children and a 20-year-old call girl called Pyle. Coley had a habit of luring children with sweets and chocolates before raping them and killing them. He often slept with the corpses of his victims, and even once cooked and ate the human organs with the belief that it could cure impotence. Coley was arrested. However, it would later be discovered that Coley carried out most of his evil endeavors in the home of his boss, Ponder. Ponder was arrested at a later date after confessions from Coley implicated him. Initially, the two men were given a death sentence, though Ponder was later acquitted of the crime, leaving only Coley. But then in 2009, a new verdict was reached, and the two men were given a death sentence. 10. Alfred Packer. Alfred Packer was one of the few cannibalistic murderers in history whose story is still a cause of debate and controversy. The American prospector was born in Pennsylvania in the year 1842. Packer would later move to Minnesota and struggle to make ends meet working as a shoemaker. On April 22, 1862, he enlisted in the Army and served during the American Civil War. However, his days in the Army weren't very significant, as he was discharged due to epilepsy barely 2 years later. After leaving the Army, Packer traveled west, working numerous jobs. His job titles included working as a field worker, hunter, taskmaster, and ranch hand. However, his bad attitude and seizures never allowed him to keep a job for long. Plus, he also had a reputation for being a liar and thief. Packer's lies and deceit helped him secure a spot among a party of 20 men who had planned an expedition from Salt Lake City to the San Juan Mountains in search of gold. Packer claimed to know the territory very well and offered to be their guide. However, when they were deep into the journey, they discovered Packer knew nothing of the location and was, in fact, epileptic. To add to it all, he was greedy with rations, always nagging, and even fought and killed a fellow traveler. At one point, the team became lost. Out there in the wilderness, with the winter cold and snow boisterous, they were crippled and unable to progress any further. Soon they ran out of provisions and began surviving on horse rations. Soon they arrived at a small encampment and got refreshed. There some men decided to give up on the quest, but 11 team members, including Packer, decided to continue the quest. The team split in two, with Packer moving alongside a team of 6 men who had decided to take a shorter mountain pass to the prize. The journey was supposed to last 10 days, but ended up being a 65-day journey with only one survivor, Packer. However, despite spending 65 days in the wilderness, Packer looked well-fed, and he also had in his possession many of the properties belonging to the other men. Initially, he claimed they had all abandoned him during the quest. But it was years later, when Packer was interrogated and the bodies of his teammates were found, that authorities realized he had murdered his teammates, stolen their possessions, and sliced off chunks of meat from their bodies for food. Packer was convicted of murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. 9. Alexander Bychkov, Russian serial killer, Alexander Bychkov, ended up on his country's blacklist after he confessed to killing at least 6 people.
Говорят, есть какой-то фирменный удар ножом Бычкова. Действительно так?
Это какой фирменный удар? В одном фильме я увидел.
What's intriguing about this killer is that he actually turned himself in. Initially, Bychkov had been arrested for shoplifting. However, officers were shocked when he revealed that he had buried corpses in his backyard. A quick search in the yard revealed 6 bodies, though officials suspected there could be more. Another revelation emerged when they found a diary belonging to Bychkov, where he recorded all of his crimes. It turned out that Bychkov's journey to become a cannibalistic serial killer started after his girlfriend left him, calling him a wimp. He was determined through his actions to show her that he was not a wimp, but was, in fact, a wolf. Law enforcement officials found evidence of cannibalism on some of Bychkov's victims, as he had taken some body parts off them. Bychkov confessed he dismembered and hid their body parts and also admitted to eating the hearts of 2 of his victims, though he never gave a reason why. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in the year 2013 and is currently still serving his sentence. 8. Boone Helm. Known as the Kentucky Cannibal, Boone Helm's cannibalistic tendencies earned him quite the reputation. Born on January 28, 1828, in Kentucky, USA, Helm was always a fan of adventure, riding horses, doing stunts, and showing feats of strength. By 1851, he got married, but his heavy drinking and physical abuse made his wife divorce him. Helm's family went bankrupt as a result of the divorce, and he moved over to California in search of gold. In his journey west to California, Helm murdered several people in various altercations and would often eat the flesh of his victims to survive the wilderness. He would often flee after these murders to avoid getting arrested by cops or killed by vigilantes who were constantly after him. At one point, Helm formed a squad with a team of 6 men on the quest to get gold. However, the group was hunted by Native Americans and driven into the wilderness, where the treacherous terrain led to the death of several of them. The men initially started feeding on their horses after they ran out of provisions. Eventually, they all died off, leaving only Helm, who ate the flesh of his comrades and survived, moving on to San Francisco. Over in San Francisco, Helm continued robbing, killing, and cannibalizing his victims. He was finally arrested in Montana, after which he was given a secret trial and hanged alongside the other members of his gang. 7. Karl Denke. In 1924, Karl Denke was arrested for attempted murder. He had attacked a man in his home with an axe. The incident happened on December 21, 1924, in Denke's apartment. The victim, Vincenz Olivier, had screamed for help, alerting a passerby who came in to find his head split open by an axe. When the police arrived, they arrested Denke and ransacked his apartment for evidence. There they found traveling papers of his victims, a ledger citing their names and dates of capture, as well as bones and pots containing human fat. Officers later found out that Denke had been practicing cannibalism for several years, often preying on homeless persons and journeymen. They found several jars filled with human flesh in his home, and rumors also suggested this man had sold human meat on several occasions. Denke was put in jail. However, he killed himself on the night of his capture, hanging himself in his prison cell with a moose fashioned from a handkerchief. Authorities say that he killed and cannibalized at least 12 people before he died, and all his victims were killed in his home. 6. Durango Vargas. Durango Vargas was a homeless man from Venezuela who earned the nickname El Comediante, which translates to people eater. His crime was killing and eating unsuspecting civilians at a park in San Cristobal, Táchira. However, actual knowledge of his cannibalism wasn't obvious until his arrest in 1999. Vargas mostly used a spear or a rock to immobilize and kill his victims, and his primary targets were male laborers and athletes. He never ate women or children, and when asked why after his arrest, he responded that women and children were too pure to consume. Vargas had a knack for human meat, killing about 14 victims or more between the years 1988 and 1999. He would cook all parts of the body except the hands, feet, and head, which he buried. However, since he was homeless and had no fridge to store fresh human meat, he resolved to kill often to make up for decomposed meat. Vargas's retribution came on February 12, 1999, after the remains of 2 young people were found close to the shack where he lived. 6 more corpses of previously missing persons were also found in the area, prompting the security agents to search his apartment. Inside, they found several containers containing human flesh, as well as some hands and feet. He was arrested and put in jail. However, even in prison, he managed to kill 3 inmates during a riot, before going ahead to dismember them and share the pieces of human flesh with other inmates. 5. Big Lurch Antron. Singleton, a.k.a. Big Lurch was just 27 years old when he was convicted of murdering his female roommate and eating part of her lungs in 2002. The rapper had no history or records of mental issues, and he was pretty much sane when he tortured, killed, and mutilated Tynesha Yassis in their apartment in Los Angeles. However, in court, his lawyer argued that Singleton had taken a hard drug the night before the incident occurred and must have been mentally impaired from the drug's effects. On the day Big Lurch was arrested, April 10, 2002, he had been found running down a street naked, covered with blood. Officers who investigated his apartment found the 21-year-old victim with a broken neck and jaw and a fractured eye socket. They also found her chest hacked open with her right lung missing. In the end, Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. 4. Alexander Pierce. Over in Ireland, a transporter named Alexander Pierce formed a habit of feeding off of his fellow men during a back-breaking journey through the wilderness. Back in the 18th and 19th century, folks who had committed crimes like stealing were sent out to serve as forced labor. This was a kind of sentence, and some prisoners managed to build a better life for themselves on the other side of the world, while others simply returned home after serving their time. Alexander Pierce was one such person who found himself transported to a foreign land to serve after he was caught stealing 6 pairs of shoes. His sentence was to last 7 years on the faraway island of Tasmania. Pierce mainly worked as a farm laborer, a simple job compared to what some other prisoners got. However, his constant habit of stealing never stopped. He frequently stole ducks and turkeys. When caught and punished, he attempted an escape alongside a gang of 7 men. In a desperate attempt, the gang stole a boat and sailed off to the wilderness. However, after 8 days of finding no food in the wilderness, they soon began to starve. That's when cannibalism began. First, they killed and ate Alexander Dalton. The following day, about 3 men fled, leaving their numbers down to 4. Next, they killed another weak member of the team, and so it continued until only 2 people were left, Alexander Pierce and the group leader, a guy named Greenhill. Neither of the 2 men trusted each other, so they both tried not to sleep. However, eventually Greenhill slept, and Pierce killed him with his axe, cannibalizing him afterwards. Pierce confessed to all his stealing, murder, and cannibalism in 1824, right before he was hanged to death. 3. Haddon Clark. Haddon Clark is an American serial killer and cannibal who is currently serving 2 30-year sentences for his crimes. Clark was convicted mainly for the murder of Michelle Dorr, a 6-year-old girl, and Laura Houtling, a 23-year-old lady. For Clark's first victim, Michelle Dorr, he slashed her throat with a knife before proceeding to rape her corpse, drink some of her blood, and also eat some of her flesh. Afterwards, Clark stuffed her remains in a waste bag and disposed of her in a park 12 miles away. Clark's second murder, however, was what led the cops to him. On the night of October 18, 1992, he broke into the house of Laura Houtling through the back and stabbed her to death in her bedroom while suffocating her with a pillow. Next, he carried her dead body in a bedsheet and buried her half a mile away. However, police found his fingerprints on the bloody pillow and quickly traced it to him. After his arrest, Clark confessed to the murder of Laura and also showed the cops where he buried her. He also revealed the burial place of his first victim, though he confessed to having murdered dozens of people right from his teenage days. In total, Clark earned a punishment of 70 years in prison and is currently serving 2. Andre Chikatilo. Andre Chikatilo was one of the worst sexual offenders to ever get caught. Once a school teacher, this violent criminal took advantage of his position to molest and murder over 50 people within the space of a few years. Chikatilo was born in 1936, and his troubles started during childhood. Hardship, famine, and war in Ukraine back in the 1930s made life unbearable. Plus, he had issues sustaining an erection due to a medical condition called hydrocephalus, or water in the brain. Slowly, an angry and depraved Chikatilo became a bully, and on a certain day during adolescence, he ejaculated while trying to overpower a girl. This earned him great ridicule in school, and the trauma and humiliation became the foundation for his future sexual misconduct and violence. By 1971, Chikatilo had become a school teacher, and his sexual misconduct against minors caused him to get fired from different schools. Chikatilo's killing spree started in 1981 after he got a job as a clerk. His victim, Larisa Tkachenko, a 17-year-old, was gagged, stabbed, and strangled to death. Chikatilo had a sexual release during the murder, so he continued to get more victims. He would lure young boys or girls to forest areas where he'd attack, rape, and mutilate them. In some cases, Chikatilo would eat the sexual organs of his victims raw or cut out sensitive parts like the tongue, nose, or eyeballs. By this time, serial killers weren't very rampant in the Soviet Union, so Chikatilo was able to get away with his crimes for a long time. However, the wake of mutilated dead bodies left behind by Chikatilo soon attracted the police, and by 1984, a deep investigation was conducted that implicated Chikatilo. However, there wasn't much evidence to put him as a serial killer, so he was released. After his release, Chikatilo kept a low profile until 1988, when he started killing again. Over the next 2 years, he had killed about 19 victims, a number of which were young boys. He became more careless, prompting the authorities to arrest him for suspicious behavior. When he was interrogated, he revealed details of all the people he had killed, how he mutilated and cannibalized them, and even led the cops to the burial site of some of his victims. Chikatilo confessed to having killed 56 people, though only 53 were confirmed. He was found guilty of 52 counts of murder and was sentenced to death for each of them. On February 14, 1994, he was executed, shot in the back of the head. One Issei Sagawa. In 1981, Issei Sagawa, a Japanese man resident in Paris, did one of the nastiest acts of inhumanity. He shot his classmate, a girl named Renee Hartevelt, and went ahead to rape her corpse and eat her flesh repeatedly, claiming to absorb her energy. However, during his trial, Sagawa was found to be legally insane, and so, rather than sentence him to prison, he was ordered to be held in a psychiatric hospital indefinitely. However, a few years after he was deported to Japan and examined by Japanese psychologists, he was declared sane. The hospital released him in 1986, and since the case had been closed in France, Sagawa was not tried by the law anymore. He went on to become a free man. Today, Sagawa walks free despite his despicable crime. And while some have criticized him as an example of injustice, his story has made him somewhat popular in Japan. Sagawa lives in Tokyo currently and has written books and lectures about his life. What do you think about these crazy human cannibals? Which of them do you consider to be the worst? Do you think they got justice for their crimes? We'd love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime videos like this. Bye.